Order. Order. John Penrose to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Owen. Good to have you looking after us here this morning, and I beg to move that this House has considered a sovereign wealth fund for the UK. The title and the subject come from a proposal I published recently with the help from the good people at the Social Market Foundation, and it's called The Great Rebalancing, a Sovereign Wealth Fund to make the UK's economy the strongest in the G20. Available from all good bookstores, but failing that, the House of Commons Library have referred to it in a good deal of detail in their excellent debate briefing note, and for anyone who is sufficiently riveted to want more details, it's available on my website with a slightly pithier summary alongside it written for the Times Red Box column 2. Now, the reason, Mr. Owen, for writing it was simple. This is a crucial moment for Britain. Brexit creates an inflection point, an opportunity to ask ourselves fundamental questions for the first time in many, many years about what kind of country we want to be once we leave the EU. How can we best use the spur of our newly won freedoms to change the way our country works? What do we want our economy to look like, our society, our cities, and our countryside? The Great Rebalancing is an attempt to answer at least some of those questions. Because for years, economists of all kinds, of left and right, have said rightly that Britain is worse at long-term planning than other countries. We save less, we invest less, and we build less economically vital, growth-promoting infrastructure like roads, railways and ports than they do. Other oil-rich countries like Norway have built up large sovereign wealth funds, but we have not. So we've got a rock-and-roll economy, ladies and gentlemen, that lives for today and depends too much on consumer demand, unlike more sober-sided countries like Germany, who are much better at investing for tomorrow. And the result is that we lag behind the US, behind Germany, behind France, and even behind Italy in productivity. It takes a German worker 4 days to produce what we Brits make in 5. So we work longer hours for lower pay than other countries, and we won't be able to raise our living standards sustainably or to build an economy that works for everyone unless we fix this fundamental underlying issue. Even worse, we have a huge national debt, partly as a hangover from the 2008 financial crisis, but mainly because the promises we've made in our pay-as-you-go pensions and benefits system create long-term liabilities which are financially effectively the same as debt. Now, this isn't fair to our children and our grandchildren, who will have to repay the money that we've borrowed. We're handing them the bills for our lifestyle rather than paying for it ourselves. Now, these are long-term structural problems which are deeply ingrained in our economy and in our politics. They've taken decades to build up, and they will take just as long to solve. Part of the answer, clearly, is to invest more in crucial economic infrastructure like roads, bridges and railways and ports, and to keep doing it consistently and predictably. So, for my mind, the most important and least noticed bit of the Chancellor's autumn statement wasn't just the £23 billion investment pledge for innovation and infrastructure, although that was certainly welcome and valuable. It was the instruction to the National Infrastructure Commission to plan for a future where we spend every year between 1 and 1.2% of GDP on this stuff, rather than 0.8% today. So this isn't just a one-off, it's a permanent change that he's proposed. It stops the infrastructure boom and bust, which we've suffered for decades, where governments postpone critical growth-promoting projects whenever money gets tight. And making our investments boringly predictable really matters, because stop-start spending doesn't just delay growth, it means taxpayers get less value for money. If there isn't a smooth pipeline of projects, we can't build as much with the money that we have either. But what about that huge national debt, Mr. Owen? How do we make it fair for our children and for our grandchildren? Well, first, clearly, we've got to stop adding to the debt, which means stopping borrowing. The autumn statement said the deficit will be down to 2% cyclically adjusted across the business cycle by 2020, which is a vital step in the right direction. My proposal goes one step further and asks for an annual public declaration by the Independent Office of Budgetary Responsibility to make sure the government's budget stays balanced across the economic cycle in future. Now, this is a small but crucial piece of fiscal rulemaking, because we gave the OBR responsibility for the financial forecasts to stop chancellors using fairy tale projections to cover up problems when they were under pressure. So once we finally balance the budget, sometime during the next Parliament, we should extend that same mechanism a little further to shine a harsh and unforgiving spotlight on any future Chancellor who isn't prepared to live within the country's means. We haven't, after all, Mr. Owen, endured years of austerity and belt-tightening just to have a future financially irresponsible Chancellor toss it all away. Happily give way to it.
Is he envisaging a permanent budget surplus?
Oh, Mr. Owen, I'm at this point in my remarks, I'm envisaging a consistently balanced budget across the economic cycle. That would be a major step forward, and given this country's history since the Second World War, that would produce a welcome degree of certainty, both for businesses and for governments and for everybody else as well. I'll come on to how we might then build up the Sovereign Wealth Fund in a second, and perhaps he'd like to come back at me if there are any further questions, if he thinks I haven't covered the issue properly at that point. So, once we've stopped borrowing, we can start saving, which is to the point the Honourable Gentleman just made. That's where the Sovereign Wealth Fund comes in. Because most of that huge national debt comes from our pay-as-you-go state pension and benefits scheme. So paying off government bonds, gilts, won't be enough on its own. Even worse, we can't just grow our way out of trouble because the pensions and benefits scheme's liabilities will just grow with us. So instead, we need a sovereign wealth fund to pay for what we owe in our pensions and benefits system. It will give the scheme... Happy
Grateful to the honourable member for giving way. As he is one of the more assiduous members of his party, he will have seen that the Cooperative Party floated in September 2013 this very idea of a UK sovereign wealth fund. I wonder if he will, in his remarks, comment on whether he sees our proposal of turning the Crown Estate into that sovereign wealth fund as an attractive idea.
Well, Mr. Owen, I haven't included in my paper any proposal to take existing government assets and pour them into the Sovereign Wealth Fund, to give it a kickstart, if you like. It would be possible, and in fact, there are parallel examples. The previous Chancellor floated an idea for a shale gas sovereign wealth fund, or a regional sovereign wealth fund, based on the proceeds from fracking as well. So there are a number of possible government assets that could be added to any sovereign wealth fund. I'm not actually proposing that they should be in this proposal, but there are respectable parallels, and in fact, for example, the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund is based on the proceeds of their North Sea oil. So that would certainly be an option to consider. It's not actually what I'm proposing here, but it is certainly not beyond the bounds of possibility. There are very respectable parallels and antecedents elsewhere in the world. So as I was saying, Mr. Owen, we need a sovereign wealth fund to pay for what we owe in our pensions and benefits system. It will give the scheme the same strong financial foundations as other occupational pension schemes in the UK for the first time in our country's history. And like those other schemes, it should be managed through a fully independent board, in this case, a new standalone national insurance trust with a heavyweight board of trustees like the Bank of England to prevent political meddling. Building the fund is rather like repaying a mortgage or saving for a pension. We've got to put a little aside every month for a very, very long time. We'd start by creating a new national debt charge, carved out of income tax to pay the interest on the national debt, currently projected to be just over 2% of GDP by 2021. It will be set as a percentage of GDP, and as the economy grew, any surplus would be used to build up the fund. The process needs to take a long time, Mr. Owen, several generations, so the costs don't all fall unfairly on current taxpayers. But it's urgent too, because we need to start soon. There will be a brief moment when the government's budget reaches balance in the next Parliament, when we could set this up. But old, bad habits die hard, Mr. Owen. As soon as there's a hint, a sniff of a surplus, there will be dozens, hundreds of proposals for tax cuts or extra spending from all sides of the House, many of them excellent ideas, but we have to make sure that we don't miss this golden moment of opportunity to set the fund up at that moment when we can, before it's too late and any surplus money is earmarked for other things as well. So we have to make sure that all the effort and sacrifice of getting the budget into balance isn't wasted. A balanced budget can't just be a one-off episode of fiscal sobriety, where our rock and roll economy detoxes for a few months before hitting the party scene again. We need a long-term commitment to clean living, to this fundamental rebalancing of our economy which the Sovereign Wealth Fund would deliver. Rebalancing our economy would build stronger foundations so we invest more for the long term. It would deliver faster growth and extra jobs so we could afford stronger and better public services. It would insulate us against the next economic shock, like the latest banking crisis. It would make us less dependent on foreign investors once Brexit is complete. And, of course, it would build our international heft around the world. And it would answer some of those fundamental questions about the kind of country we want to be after we leave the EU. Happy to give him.
Congratulate him on his choice of debate. Would he agree with me, and I agree with him, in terms of the long-term thinking that will be required to create a sovereign wealth fund? But would he agree with me that what we need to see is successive governments committing to the promotion of a wealth fund, and then the beneficiaries being seen throughout the United Kingdom to be supportive of such a fund because they can see tangible benefits being accrued from it?
Mr. Owen, a crucially important point, because building up this fund, as I said, we need to start soon. It's an urgent priority that we should begin it when the budget hits balance. But once we've begun, as I said, we need to save a little for a very long time, and it needs to last over several generations so that the burden of setting the thing up doesn't fall unfairly on the current generation of taxpayers. For it to be stable over such a long period of time, the Honourable Gentleman is exactly right. It needs to be politically stable. And that means two things. Firstly, it means, I hope, a cross-party consensus behind it so that it stands some degree of political longevity on that basis. But also it will need some institutional bulwarks to stop chancellors of whichever party happens to be in power at the time when they are under pressure, facing a general election, facing a cyclical recession, trying to interfere, meddle or get sticky fingers on the money. So he's absolutely right. It will need some very, very strong institutional safeguards around it as well. I should add, Mr. Owen, that those are laid out in some detail in my paper. I wasn't planning to go into huge detail about it here. Happy to if anybody wants me to, but I thought I would spare everybody the detail at this stage in my remarks, just simply because of pressure of time, and other people I know want to add their thoughts. But if we can do this, Mr. Owen, we would be a fairer and more generationally just country, because we wouldn't be saddling our children and grandchildren with the bills for our lifestyle today. We would be more socially just, because low and high taxpayers would all own the same personal stake in the fund that underpins their individual state pension and benefits payments. And so I hope that all of us in this debate, including the Minister when he replies, will address three issues in our speeches. Firstly, can we all agree that rebalancing our economy is necessary and important? I think we've had a number of interventions so far which indicates that there may be some consensus on that, but it would be good, Mr. Owen, to get that on the record from all sides if we can. Secondly, can we all acknowledge that once we've got the budget into balance, only reducing the bits of our national debt which we happen to have issued as government bonds won't be enough to achieve rebalancing on its own? And thirdly, that a sovereign wealth fund to underpin the state pensions and benefits system is at least one of the valid ways to solve these deeply ingrained imbalances and problems in our nation's economy and finances, even if there may be others out there as well. Because, think of it, if we can agree on some or all of these issues on a cross-party basis, we could be launching a new Britain, a socially just, generationally just, asset-owning democracy on a scale that no other developed nation could match. The post-war governments created new institutions like the NHS and the welfare state, which had little relevance to rebuilding homes and cities damaged in the war, but had everything to do with forging a new society and a new nation. The post-Brexit government is our generation's chance to do the same, to leave a mark, to mould and weld our fractured society into a new and better shape. This will be a brief political moment which, if we grasp it without fear, whether we are from the political left or right, we can create a legacy for our children and grandchildren to remember us by with pride. So let's think big. Let's think long term, and let's do this together. And I'm finishing my remarks there. I should wait for the honourable gentleman's comments.
I think there might be broad agreement in what we're discussing, but he has premised much of his case on a surplus being run. As I understand it, the 3 fiscal rules which the new Chancellor, has introduced have actually moved away from the previous budget surplus rule, and there is nothing in the current fiscal rules that actually says that we would be running a permanent surplus.
Well, Mr. Wren, what I'm proposing here would take effect once we've got the budget into balance. The Chancellor's new set of fiscal rules are designed to take us through the next few years before we get the budget into balance. But once we do get the budget into balance, I think any Chancellor will, since we're talking about after the next general election, I hope it will be the current Chancellor, but I won't prejudge the results of that election, Mr. Owen. Any Chancellor will need then to rethink and reset fiscal rules once we get the budget into balance. And what I'm arguing here, as the honourable gentleman will have heard, is for the national debt charge to begin with just to carve out what we are already committed to pay on interest on the debt. But as the economy grows, that will slowly start to yield a very, very small surplus, which can then be used to pay into the Sovereign Wealth Fund. It's a very long-term process, but we do need to start it soon.
The question is, in the House is considered the UK Sovereign Wealth Fund.